This conference will
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Janusz Bill. I'm based in Warsaw in the British Embassy. I work for the Department for International Trade. So we are the UK department that is looking to attract inward investors into the UK, while at the same time making sure that the companies in the UK can export their goods to the wider world. We also look after the trade policy side. This event is delivered to you in collaboration with the Scottish Development International. Some of you will already know that we have delivered this kind of technical webinars last year. All materials are available on our webpage. Today, we are hosting excellent speakers from Ocean Winds who will be sharing with us their experience from the offshore wind UK market. Dan Finch, UK Managing Director, and Mark Baxter, Head of Development UK. I remember when I met Dan last year during Wind Conference in Steros, and I was impressed on how Dan was presenting and speaking about the UK market and the experience. So this is how we arrived to this workshop today, as I thought it would be useful to share this experience widely. So thanks for joining again, and I will now pass on to Dan and Mark. We are going to have a 45-50 minute presentation followed by a question. Over to you, Dan or Mark. Thanks.
Good morning. It's nice to be here with you today. As Janusz said, my name's Dan Finch, and I'll be presenting alongside my colleague Mark Baxter. Just as a brief introduction, I'm afraid today you'll be stuck with me mainly on camera. Mark is sitting with me in our offices in Edinburgh, but there's evidence, there's proof. But he's going to be controlling the actual presentation for us today. But you can ask questions, obviously, of either of us. A brief introduction. My name's Danny Finch. I'm the Managing Director for the UK. My background's been in renewables for many years, but I've been working in offshore wind probably for about 15 years plus. And what we'll do today is talk about, some of that experience and how that relates to how we would see operations and development taking place in Poland. I'll leave Mark to introduce himself.
Hi there, everybody. Mark Baxter. I'm the Head of Development in the UK for Ocean Winds. I'm also going to be the Project Director on our new project Caledonia, which we'll touch on as part of this presentation. I have been in offshore wind and renewables for over 10 years. Originally, I ended up developing and consenting 4.8 gigawatts of the Dogger Bank projects initially, and now I've come to Ocean Winds to support the development activities here. Nice to meet you all.
Okay, let's move on to the agenda for this morning. Planning to cover today is basically an introduction to Ocean Winds, who we are and where we come from. A bit of overview of the UK projects. Obviously the plan today is to talk about our experiences within the UK, but also to relate this to the experiences that we foresee in Poland. I should also say that part of my role, as well as being the country manager for the UK, is also to be the lead in Poland. So I'm also responsible for our projects in Poland. The third item on the agenda is then we'll look at the success factors of the offshore development in the UK, what's worked, and some of the lessons learnt, and then we'll go back to the summary of how we see things moving forward in the future. Okay. So the first thing we'll start with is a little bit about Ocean Winds. So Ocean Winds is a joint venture, 50-50 joint venture between EDP, which is EDP Renewables of Portugal, and Engie of France. This was set up approximately 2 years ago, and the logic was getting a bit of interference from somebody's mic. This was set up a couple of years ago to bring together the expertise of both Engie and EDP, bring together the assets that we were working on at the time, and then to jointly develop in the future all the offshore capabilities of both companies to deliver multiple projects over the next, going forward from here. worldwide. We actually started working together in 2012 when we started to work on the development of a bid for projects in France, which we cover in a minute. And from there, we've actually grown the team to somewhere in excess of about 300, 320 staff, of which about 25 staff are based in Warsaw in Poland, working on our projects there. Okay, so just to look at the portfolio that we presently have. In the UK, this is where we started our development back in 2010 with projects in the Moray Firth area. For those of you who are familiar with Scottish geography, it's in the Inverness region in the northeast of Scotland. So we won in the first bid round three projects in effect in that area. These projects were combined into one to become Moray East. We went forward from there to develop Moray West, and then expanded firstly into France and then into the US. And then we have now combined projects, including those that we have in Portugal, Belgium, and so on. But to go back, the Moray projects in the UK are all fixed bottom projects, and we'll talk about these a little bit more in a minute. The projects that we have in the United States include a 50-50 joint venture with Shell, which is known as the Mayflower project, which is up to approximately 2 gigawatts and off the Massachusetts coast. We recently won another opportunity in the US called New York Bight, where we successfully bid in to manage a project and deliver a project there, which will be approximately 1.7 gigawatts. And away over on the west coast, where the water's deeper, we are presently looking at a floating project, which uses our own internal technology that we've developed over the years with a company called Principal Power. And there we plan to deploy between 100 and 150 megawatts of floating. Further afield, we have an operational wind farm at Seamaid in Belgium, where we have about 17% of the ownership. We also have an operational floating project off the coast of Portugal called Windfloat Atlantic. And now we are in the process of final completion, getting to FID on a floating project in the Mediterranean called EFGL. Again, using the same semi-submersible floating technology. 2 further fixed projects in France make up the most of our European portfolio, apart from B and C. And B and C are the projects that we are developing 100% ownership in Poland. Further afield in Asia, we are also looking at floating projects, including those in Korea, where we have a partnership with a company called KF Wind, and we have approximately 1.2 gigawatts in that area.
Okay, the next part of this agenda is really to touch on the UK projects, just to give a little bit of insight into our portfolio in the UK. Before we went into the detail of this, I just wanted to give a little bit of perspective on what it's taking or has taken for developers within the UK to achieve a seabed lease and go into operations. The development pathway here is extensive. It has for many years taken up to 10, 12 years to move from lease award to actually an operational wind farm. And when we come into the Moray East, Moray West projects, we'll give some flavour to that. But it is a challenging environment. I mentioned working on Dogger Bank at the start of this presentation, and I'm sure Dan's got similar stories whereby we start with quite a significant portfolio of projects, but attrition does happen as a result of the development process. Dogger Bank started off as a 12 gigawatt aspiration, and now it's a 4.8 gigawatt project that is moving into construction with those respective developers. And that's just today. Both Dan and I started the round 3 projects back in 2010, and projects from that round are just coming to fruition now. One of the themes that we're very passionate about right now is that offshore wind developments need to happen faster for a number of reasons. Not only security of supply, the climate change emergency, but for many other reasons too. And I wanted to give a little bit of perspective on what is being taken. But some of the lessons learned that we've all experienced here in the UK are looking at opportunities not to accelerate this type of process. Just I will touch on, we'll go into each individual project separately, and Dan will cover Moray East and Moray West, and I'll touch on Caledonia. But Dan rightly says that we've made our home in Scotland. Our head office, our UK head office, is here in Edinburgh, primarily because of the work the team have done in developing our Scottish portfolio. We started with Moray East in the middle there in 2010. And then Moray West is our second project, and then more recently we've got Caledonia. As you can see, it's an extension of Moray East to the north. I have a couple of bullet points, a couple of markers on the map, which is Buckie and Fraserburgh. From where you can see, those are our operational bases. So where we have developed our operational centre. So Fraserburgh is active right now. Buckie will be the operational and maintenance base for Moray West. And what we're looking at is creating a very efficient hub model here to service our wind farms. We'll move on now, and I'll let Dan touch on Moray East in a little bit more detail.
So the Moray East project, we would say that this project is, sets a standard for development in Scotland, in particular, if not the UK. And we started this back in 2010, when we were awarded the access rights for a licensing round called Round 3. This was a round undertaken by the organisation in the UK, the Crown Estate, which owns and operates the seabed around the UK coastline. At that stage, there were about 9 zones offered to different developers, of which one was our zone, Zone 3. We actually took the zone into consent starting in 2010. We submitted, so this was a relatively small zone, it should be said. But as Mark mentioned just now, there was a certain amount of attrition during this process. So of the 9 zones, 3 zones have subsequently failed and not made it through to either consent or construction. So it gives you a bit of an idea of the likely losses during the consenting process. So the consents were submitted in 2012, a joint consent for offshore and onshore, although there were additional consents required for the onshore side, particularly the substation. In the UK, the system is that the generator developer, in this case ourselves, can actually build and initially operate all the onshore infrastructure, all the grid infrastructure, but that we have to sell that infrastructure on through a development process or a bid process controlled by a UK government department. The logic is it gives the developer the opportunity to build all the infrastructure, but then in the UK, through competition, they want that infrastructure to be owned by a third party. Okay, so the consent was initially awarded for the Moray East project. The consenting process enables us to consent, a far bigger envelope, if you like, for the chosen technologies that may or may not be deployed. So, for example, the award of the consent allowed us to install somewhere in the region of 1116 megawatts. At the end of the day, as you'll see, we've built a wind farm of 950 megawatts. Why the difference? Well, originally the consent we wanted to have as broad an envelope, as much scope as possible, but there's a competitive process in the UK for the allocation of your route to market through the CFD system. And the CFD system is exceptionally competitive in the UK. And so we have to have the most competitive wind farm in order to be able to compete with all others to win a CFD. So in a round called AR2, we won a CFD back in 2017. At the time, the target was to reduce the cost of energy in the UK to £100 per megawatt hour. And in that auction round, we managed to bid £57.50, successfully beating the target that had been in place for 5 or 6 years by almost half. It was a big step forward for the industry in the UK at the time. What we did is we have now constructed this wind farm. The wind farm is fully operational. It was built during the COVID pandemic, which was a real challenge for us. There were multiple lessons, some of which we can possibly touch on, particularly through the Q&A session. But we successfully put the first turbine into operation towards the end of last summer, and the entire project is now up and running. So we have 950 megawatts offshore, and the onshore, after losses, etc., at sea, comes down to about 900 megawatt grid connection. So the next project that we are working on now is Moray West. Moray West had a much quicker timeline. The lessons from Moray East, which enabled us to actually develop this project, much quicker. It's at the western part of the Moray Firth Round 3 seabed zone, and we've actually started activities on site at the moment, despite not actually having a CFD. So in the UK, like in other countries, we've now started to explore other means of access to market, which can include direct commercial PPAs as well as the CFD system. But there are also other means of accessing market. And in the future, obviously, future projects will look at things like, direct offtake for hydrogen or ammonia and so on and so on. So it's been in active development since 2016. The key consent application was submitted in about 2018, and we received the consents in 2019. So you can see it's a much quicker timescale, learning the lessons of the first project. The consent was awarded, giving us potential generation of up to 850 megawatts. The anticipated build-out capacity is going to be around 900, because what we will do is we will overplant the site, we will use as much capacity as we possibly can, and we'll be using the next generation of turbines. So in the first project, we were using 9.5 megawatt machines. In this project, which we have already contracted, we will be using turbines in excess of 14 megawatts. Okay, so since consent, we've carried on and developed the project. We've varied the consent to enable us to use these new larger machines. We are preparing for the CFD process, which in the UK will take place in the next few months. We expect the results towards somewhere between April and July. But as I say, we've already started construction, anticipating that we'll be at first power by 2024.
Okay, I'm going to touch on Caledonia, which is our most recent success in the UK. I'm not sure how many of you are aware, but most recently, ScotWind, the Scottish leasing round set out by Crown Estate Scotland, took place over the past few years, culminating in the results in January this year. Originally, just to give a bit of context, everyone's view of that leasing round is that 10 gigawatts would be awarded as part of the outcome of that event, and a proportion of it being floating offshore wind and a proportion of it being fixed. Many of us, the industry as a whole, was quite surprised by the announcement of Scottish Government to announce that 25 gigawatts of offshore wind sites were leased. Proportionately, again, probably the highest amount ever seen in terms of floating to encourage commercial scale floating happening in Scotland, but equally a large proportion of fixed, and it was almost 50-50 in terms of split. We were very pleased to be successful in Caledonia, primarily because it's an extension of our existing developments in the Moray Firth, and because of all the lessons learned that we've just gone through in terms of East and West, it puts us in a prime position to deliver low-cost generation and supply low-cost power as a result of all the efficiencies that we can make by all the 10 years of data acquisition and collection and analysis, but also our ability to understand how you actually deliver consent and deliver these projects. Now, one of the things that Caledonia is it's a fixed site. It's about a gigawatt at the moment, but we believe that we can expand that site to be up to 2 gigawatts, given our knowledge of the region. It will be fixed, and we expect it to also be jacket foundations, although that is still up for design analysis. one of the things we'll come on to in a minute in terms of program relationships. We can't emphasize the importance of stakeholder engagement through these processes, from the immediate point of achieving a seabed lease all the way through to the operations of the wind farm, because they don't stop. They continue, and it's important to have healthy relationships, which we do in the Moray Firth, and we'll come on to that in a second. And when you look at the ScotWind results and you look at all the new players in the market who have come from oil and gas majors to new, smaller developers looking to get into floating, the majority of experienced developers is few in terms of ScotWind. And we, being one of the developers who have spent a lot of time understanding the best way and most efficient way of doing things, has an advantage above others. One, not to make the same mistakes that we've made before, but two, to be able to support government and understanding what it actually takes to deliver these projects quickly, which is we're becoming, all of us, I assume, are being acutely aware of the importance of renewables as part of our energy mix now. The next slide I'm going to go on to is more about the success factors, and when we talk about success factors here, Dan's going to cover the first few slides, and I'll join in at some point. But success factors and what the UK has done to encourage the offshore wind market, and then how we have taken that challenge and applied it to delivery. So I'll let Dan move on.
Okay, so obviously one of the early things was that the UK was quite an early mover in offshore wind, and was for a long time the largest large-scale developer of offshore wind technology. I think now probably China is on a par or ahead of the UK in delivering. But what we've actually learned overall are several things. Right, one is to have a long-term target, and for the government to be, stable, logical, committed, and show that they're being driven to deliver large-scale offshore wind. As I mentioned earlier, there were 3 or 4 things that the government wanted early in the process, and I think it's pretty much the same for most governments. But they were driving the cost of energy down, the levelized cost of energy. They were consistently asking for a delivery of below £100 a megawatt hour by 2020, and that was the target for the industry as a whole. They were always consistently looking for jobs, local content, the scaling up of the ability of the UK to deliver large parts of its own supply chain, but to do so cost effectively, and not just to support ineffective supply chain within the UK. The next one was obviously climate change, and to be able to deliver large scale renewables from offshore wind. It was highlighted early on that the scale that was available was significant around the UK coastline, and as a result they also set a target of 40 gigawatts by 2030. So to deliver 40 gigawatts by 2030, which is significant, obviously. And the last thing was security of supply. Now, I don't intend to go into this in too much detail, but security of supply obviously is a key factor for most nations, if not all nations. And it was very, very important to the UK that we were able to manage the large proportion of our electricity and our overall energy demands. So they did this, the government did this in various ways by working with industry in a group called the Offshore Wind Industry Council. The OWIC is a body that represents both the developers and government. And what we did is jointly produce an industrial strategy, a sector deal in effect, which I know is now being used in other geographies, other countries, and that there's an equivalent sector deal within Poland. The industrial strategy looked at what government could do in order to facilitate the delivery of offshore wind, and in exchange what the developers and the developer community would be able to do to demonstrate that they were going to meet these targets and deliver the appropriate cost, reduce the impact on climate change, see the significant increase in jobs and job opportunities, including the whole range of activities, including things like work experience, skills development, education, and so on and so on. And lastly, but not least, be able to have a major impact on the security of supply within the UK. So the target was set at 40 gigawatts. It's been a real slow start to that process because we tended to have auctions every 2 or 3 years. In the future, the UK government has said that they will have targets annually and auctions annually. The target is likely to be increased from 40 gigawatts to potentially nearer 50. And to date, we have only deployed about 12.5 gigawatts. But you can see a significant ramp up now in the number of projects that are available. In the auction that's going to take place this year, there will be over 8 gigawatts of wind farms ready to deploy. And these wind farms will all have to be built by 2026, 27. So just to reiterate, one of the key factors for deliverability is the cooperation between government, a consistent, reliable government that's going to stick to what it said it was going to do, and then to have a developer community that works together and delivers, to these targets, but in exchange can expect from government a consistent approach, regular auctions, regular options for leases on land, and so on and so on.
Okay. So the next lesson learned for us, as Dan said, I mean, back in 2010, we were in a very early stage of offshore wind development, and not only developers being immature in their understanding of what it takes to develop an offshore wind farm, but also the regulators and the statutory authorities and all stakeholders, immature in their understanding of the impact of offshore wind. And we have spent an extraordinary amount of time working with regulators and stakeholders, one to educate, but one to work with to understand how we can actually deliver these critical infrastructure projects. And I cover both regimes here in the UK, just so there's a little understanding that the two regimes in Scotland and also in England are slightly different. They both have their benefits and their issues. In Scotland, where we have the majority, all our development is you have a two-step process, which is an offshore consent through a Section 36 license and accompanying marine licenses that allow you to do the activity in the water. And then you have your traditional onshore planning activity for the onshore works, the substation, the cable routing, and all the ancillary activities around that. And they're two separate consents. In England and Wales, it tends to be slightly different. They try to bundle the offshore and onshore consents together, and they have a very prescriptive stakeholder engagement process where a significant amount of stakeholder engagement happens at the front end of a project in order to bring along stakeholders all the way through to the point of submission with a common understanding of what you agree on and what you disagree on, which I personally think is an excellent way to undertake that. Scotland isn't so prescriptive. It puts on the developer to pick and choose how they want to go about that, but in England it's far more prescriptive. And one of the most important things that came out of that activity was with all stakeholders trying to agree formally statements of common ground. And this goes for all the different environmental factors and groups, all the statutory authorities and non-statutory authorities, which are equally as powerful as the statutory authorities. And you would sit down with these authorities and agree what you agree on and write down what you disagree on, and hopefully with a view forward to work towards a common goal. And what we found, obviously, is that one of the key things about consents and environmental assessment and stakeholder engagement is that data acquisition is critical. Doing a high level of data acquisition and analysis to inform your consent applications and your environmental impact assessments, allows you to have informed discussions with stakeholders. The issues that we've had at Moray East, which we're fortunate, as I've said, because of our lessons learnt, is that through Moray East, Moray West, and now Caledonia, both are pre-construction, construction, and post-construction monitoring of ornithological issues and new technologies to help support the delivery of offshore wind farms. As a result of that, is helping us, be classified amongst most developers as a good developer who understands the issues. From commercial fisheries, another real issue for us, and I'm sure for all offshore wind farms, is that while we have areas of disagreement, the industry here in the UK has put a lot of focus on ensuring that coexistence is a strategy with commercial fishermen where it's practical to do so. And so we start with a philosophy and a principle that offshore wind farms can coexist with commercial fisheries. It's not the easiest stakeholder group to deal with, but it's one that you have to, and it's one that you have to engage, almost over communicate to enable the projects to proceed forward. We have worked with the regulators to establish working groups with some of the key sectors like commercial fisheries to facilitate a conversation and a dialogue that allows the projects to proceed. Marine mammals is a third issue that's been prominent in the UK, and we've had such strong relationships with the academic arena around the Moray Firth, and those relationships with those academia and professors who understand the topics has allowed us to have again data-driven conversations with the regulator to unblock some of the concerns around marine mammals and piling. Now, what I'm trying to get to here is that by having early conversations and using data as a mechanism to have those conversations, you can deliver quality consents, quality environmental impact assessments to have little objection. You're always going to have objection, but it's how you manage the times, the ones that you do have. And we've learned exceptionally well from that. And one thing I just want to reference is the financing of these projects. When banks or lenders or any institute comes to look at a project to buy or take a stake in, they are going to start to heavily look at the way you have developed this project, the way you have understood the impact of the project on the environment will matter massively to the bank, and they will do due diligence on this. We have felt it, and we have been able to show and demonstrate how we can show that we have developed the projects in the right way. So I encourage everyone who's involved in offshore wind farms to take the best bits of environmental impact assessment and consenting and apply it to the region, irrespective of whether the minimum requirement is being met. Go over and above, and I think you'll have some successes there. The next slide, unless you want to comment on it.
No. I think that's fine. I mentioned earlier about the driving down the cost of energy. It's obviously a key factor for all governments, and then at the end of the day, the consumer as well. The working group that I mentioned earlier, OWEC, the Offshore Wind Industry Council, is a good idea for developers within any country. It was set up and is managed with government departments. In fact, two of the most senior ministers in the UK government sit and they co-chair this group. And as I said, one of the key targets was to drive down the cost of energy. A lot of the success factors in this were around experience, innovation, and financing. One of the real obvious things is that every time you increase the size of a turbine, so there's a natural development in incremental increase in turbine capacity. What that does is it obviously brings down the number of structures you need. You can build a wind farm much quicker, and so that's a natural way of reducing the cost of energy. But some of the things that are not quite as well understood are, reducing the time that it takes you to get through the consenting process, reducing the time it takes to get to grid connection, All of these sorts of things have a significant impact in cost reduction. Innovation, using ROVs, avoiding using divers, using innovative installation techniques, using the very latest technology in installation, operations, and so on, all help to reduce costs. One of the factors that we have found is that, as we've adopted more and more technology from the likes of the oil and gas sector, of which we have a significant element of oil and gas in the UK, obviously, when we adopt some of their techniques, technologies, and so on, this helps to drive the cost down. But just as importantly, it actually gives confidence to the financial institutions that are eventually going to finance your project. And what we found is that when we came to finance the project back in 2018, 2019, the financial institutions were exceptionally keen to be involved in offshore wind. They felt that a lot of the risk had been driven out of it by the skills and experience in the UK, and therefore they were very, very keen to be part of that process. The Moray East project, for example, attracted somewhere in the region of 2.6 billion of debt finance from banks all over the world. And this is a key factor that developers must take into account all the way through the development process. So very early in the consenting, make sure your consent is realistic, reliable, can be delivered, is sensible, but it also protects the environment, because a lot of the banks now are very, very keen on, if they're going to support an environmentally beneficial project, then they want to really understand that that project is in itself going to be delivered in an environmental and safe as fashion as possible. Okay, so what we took, some of the experiences we gained, is we took turbines from generally deep waters of about 30 meters. We're now installing turbines in 60 meters of water on fixed structures. These fixed structure technologies are generally jackets, but we've also increased the envelope for monopiles. Monopiles can generally be a bit cheaper, but they have their own challenges, not least of which is around ground conditions, as some of our competitors are now finding as they struggle to install very, very big monopiles. On Moray West, for example, we are likely or are planning to install some of the biggest monopiles ever installed in the world. Sorry. So all of these things are stretching the envelope with regard to design. We've increased, in parallel with this, we've increased inter-array voltages so that we can actually reduce the losses. We have, and then also work with bigger machines. We can make the wind farm more reliable, more available. The way we lay the wind farm out is more optimized now than it would have been 10 or 15 years ago, so that we actually capture as much of the wind and experience as little losses as we possibly can. Okay. We've tended to use AC technology wherever possible, although in the UK there are some projects now which are so distant from shore they're obviously using DC. The AC tends to give us a more competitive edge. AC also enables us to deliver the projects earlier. The delivery time for DC equipment is quite long, particularly within Europe at the moment, and the lack of availability of DC experienced companies also helps to increase the cost. So for us, it's better if we can stick to AC as much as possible. One final factor that has been crucial for us in driving down the cost of energy is having a reliable grid system, and having the grid system and a grid offer available, a grid company that's able to deliver the grid connection on time and to a particular date, and for us to work in collaboration with the grid company all the way through to ensure that our infrastructure meets their infrastructure at the correct time. It's an obvious thing, but it's also a major interface. And there are examples all over the world of power projects which failed to actually meet the delivery of their grid connection, or the other way around, the grid connection failing to meet the actual power generator's requirements. And finally, one of the last things that we're moving into is, as we mentioned earlier, we have our own floating technology, and that floating technology is through a company called Principal Power. and we've been working on these projects for many years now, and will continue to do so in deeper waters around the world.
Okay, I mean the next slide. I'm conscious we've got some questions to take. I mean, you would have heard some of the lessons learned as we've moved through, and obviously we haven't been able to get into the depth of those, but we have kind of 5 points which we believe are kind of interesting points for everyone to consider. Dan mentioned the supply chain question, and this comes from both capability of the supply chain in the locality, but also the ability for anybody involved in that supply chain to deliver our projects. And the problem we have faced, and Dan can touch on this more than I, is that as the turbines are getting bigger and bigger, it has such a knock-on effect to the supply chain in itself. You know, someone builds a vessel for a 9 megawatt turbine, before they know it, the vessel's not big enough to take a 21 megawatt turbine, and the foundation needs to be redesigned to accommodate that new turbine. So we get into this, the acceleration of innovation within the supply chain means that ports, suppliers, skills, all of these aspects of the supply chain need to be looked at as one, so that you have a strategy to be able to deliver the new turbines at the right point in time. For Caledonia, just to give an example, you know, Caledonia at the moment is looking at having 20 plus megawatt turbines installed on it, which and that is around 2030 on this initial slide. We've already been told by the supply chain they don't have vessels that can take 20 megawatt turbines. You know, they're just yet getting vessels out of the shipyards now that can take, you know, the 12 to 16 megawatt turbines, let alone ones in the future. So I think everyone's got to be realistic, practical, and understand exactly what it takes to deliver these projects, and and how you turn, you know, the bit of paper into an actual functioning wind farm. Do you want to say anything else on the supply chain?
No, from a supply chain point of view, you've got to work with the supply chain. Again, going back to the collaboration between the supply chain and developers, it's always been pushed by government, but it's also been seen as an important factor for the UK developers to have an active role in investing in and encouraging the local content. So that companies are ready for when the projects are ready to deliver. So I think we can probably cover that a little bit more later in the Q&A session. Yeah. So the next thing is, a healthy pipeline of projects. We need to have projects. The developers need a healthy pipeline of projects, but as importantly, if not more importantly, the supply chain needs a healthy pipeline of projects. It's no good having, a group of projects delivered in 1 year and then a gap of 3 or 4 years before anything else, because all that happens is the supply chain contracts or disappears and is not ready then for future development. It also doesn't invest. So a healthy pipeline of projects coming consistently year after year after year is crucial for the market. And that's why the UK has biannual auctions and heading to annual auctions, so that there are projects coming on to the system every year for the next 10, 20, 30 years. Experience. I think it goes without saying, but it's better to learn the lessons, and when you learn the lessons, to share these lessons. But within any individual developer, they're collating these lessons learned so that they don't relearn them every time they're in a different geography. There's no doubt for me that when you operate in different geographies, there are some things that are fundamentally different. It may be the consenting process, it may be the development process, it could be, the ground conditions, it could be, the government itself and the way the government wants to operate, either in a regulated or a deregulated market. But overall, the experience that's transferable from one geography to another. And that's a really important thing. Don't go through learning the lessons again from scratch in a new geography that you could take from somewhere else. In other words, learn from your neighbours. Partnership between experienced industry and government. I've already mentioned this. We need to make sure that the supply chain is ready, We need to make sure that the ports, the facilities, not just the maintenance ports, but the intermediate development ports and the construction ports are ready to accept projects, and that there's sufficient capacity within these ports so that, for example, that multiple projects can use different ports, or they can come one after the other using the same facilities. What you don't want is multiple projects all arriving at the same time at the same port, or there to be too much of an overlap between the offshore wind deployment and another technology, like the port is used as a container port, or it's an import port for LNG, or it's an import port for something else. The port has to have sufficient capacity to deal with offshore wind when it's needed. And the last thing is really around grid integration, and I think I've already covered this before. So I think really we need to make sure that overall there is a consistent approach and no mixed messages to the market or to the developers from government, if it's national government or local government, and that everybody is striving to get to the same goal. Targets are important, but it's also important to see that consistency from government has to stay over the entire lifeline of the project, or what you'll get is disincentivization. The supply chain won't actually mature enough, and or developers will be stop-start all the time, and the industry won't deliver what it's capable of doing.
Okay. I mean that was really where we'd got to today in terms of delivering some of the lessons learned. I mean, we're really pleased to be participating in offshore wind in the Polish market. We obviously feel that the knowledge and experience that we've had in the UK is applicable to development in Poland, and we hope that some of the items that we've discussed today have been helpful. I know it's been a quick session and there's a lot of content in there, and I'm sure there's a lot of questions, but we're happy to take some now.
Yep, for sure. I don't know if you would like to open for questions, Janusz.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for this interesting presentation. This was very helpful and useful, I should say. As you say, there are a number of questions in the chat box, so let's address them on a first come, first served basis. The first question is there a possibility to utilize the O&M bases located in Buckie and Fraserburg as assembly, marshalling and equipment load outports for Moray West?
Sorry, is it possible to use the same marshalling ports for Moray East and West that we've used before? Is that what the question was?
To use Fraserburg and Buckie as a marshalling port, Moray West. No.
Yeah. So what we tend to find is there are different ports for different reasons, right? I mean, the ports at Fraserburg and Buckie are traditional fishing ports, right? So they tend to be much smaller. Access is not as easy for the large scale vessels that we're talking about here, and also to be honest, the laydown areas for the equipment is insufficient at these particular bases. So Fraserburg and Buckie, traditional fishing ports, if you look them up, they're fairly small in relation to the likes of Nig and Ardusir and ports like Invergordon. And these are traditional fabrication type yards, or ports that have been used in the oil and gas industry. They have been modified over the last 10 to 15 years in anticipation of future oil and gas, or decommissioning, or renewables. And renewables can include offshore wind, but in the UK it also includes a small amount of wave and tidal marine type deployment. So these facilities, the marshalling yards, if you like, tend to have been actually modified specifically for the offshore wind industry. So things like access to deep water, deep-ish water, not excessively deep, but things like the load-bearing characteristics of the facilities, the ability to partially build the turbines there in some cases. So in some cases, we partly assemble the turbines before they're taken offshore. So there has to be, quite a large area of land. So for Moray East, for example, we had in the region of 100 jackets. Each jacket is about 80 to 90 meters tall. It has a footprint of about 50 meters by 50 meters. And so as you assembled, you brought the jackets to this marshalling yard. And at the marshalling yard, you check the jackets, finished fitting them out before they were deployed by a different vessel. So you can see you need a large amount of land for that sort of activity. Right. It also actually helps in local content, to be honest, because wherever the jackets are made, you still have to bring them to a yard to finish the manufacturing process, to test them, to fit them out, and all of this creates quite a significant supply chain locally to the project.
Yes,
Okay,
thank you. Yes, just to add, last year, last year we had 2 sessions on the role of ports, including marshalling ports, service ports, and the conclusion was that there is no single port in UK which serves every need. No. So that's something which we should remember. Then the next question is from Adam. Have you looked into hydrogen as energy carrier in order to reduce support export infrastructure? Interesting question.
Yes, hydrogen is, you're right, it is a very interesting question. And it's something that we're looking at more and more, not just in the UK, but in other geographies as well. One of the challenges for wind in general is its intermittency. Although we do now have quite high capacity factors. So we're seeing capacity factors now up into the late 50s, into the 60s percentage-wise. There is also a challenge from time to time when you have a lot of offshore wind farms in overcapacity, if you like. There's too much generation. So how are we going to deal with this? Well, the UK, along with other geographies, is looking at things like putting in more load in the area. So we are looking at using hydrogen, ammonia, batteries, and so on to store some of this power. The UK is also looking at electrifying the oil and gas infrastructure offshore. So there's 2 benefits to this. One is the oil and gas infrastructure in the North Sea produces a lot of CO2. It also, it's a pollutant for climate change. It produces somewhere between 5 and 10% of the UK's carbon. And so there's now a big drive in the UK to electrify all the offshore platforms by interconnecting them with wind farms. To go back to the hydrogen question, we are looking at using renewable technologies, whether they are whether they are onshore wind or solar in some countries, or in the UK and in Northern Europe using offshore wind to produce hydrogen. There's a real potential to do this in the north of Scotland for a couple of reasons. One is the grid is not particularly strong, so it's beneficial to support the grid system when it's not available. It's important because we can use some of the oil and gas infrastructure. We can also feed the production of the hydrogen facility into the gas network quite easily in the north of Scotland, although the actual amount that can be injected into the system is relatively low at the moment. So most projects, not all projects, but most projects are looking at potentially including an element of hydrogen because we see hydrogen having an increasing market share in the years to come. Today, it's very difficult to see a cost-benefit analysis of hydrogen, but we foresee that 5 to 10 years' time, it's quite likely that it will be something that we will be very, very active in.
Yeah, it's safe to say that every bid within ScotWind, a high proportion had a hydrogen element to it, including ours. So the Caledonia project is considering hydrogen as part of its envelope, and that's onshore. That's onshore hydrogen rather than offshore production. Sorry, onshore production rather than offshore.
Okay, let's move quickly to the next question. which is in relation to Poland, to the Polish market. And the question is, based on presented experience, what is the planned organizational scheme for the implementation of the project in Poland?
The planned skills, did you say? Sorry?
Organizational scheme.
So I'm not exactly sure what you mean by organizational scheme. Do you mean we have a team already based in Poland? The team operates under Kasper, my colleague in Poland, who is responsible for managing the team. As I say, the team at the moment is about 20 to 25. The plan is to increase number of staff up to, well, double that in effect in the very, very short term, so that we can actually take the projects through development, to construct the projects, and then to own and operate the projects in the future. We would very much like to be involved in future projects. We want to be involved in the next phase and the next round of offshore floating wind and offshore fixed wind. And we plan to be a long-term player in the market in Poland. We are not there just to be a developer who then develops and sells the project on. We are an owner operator in most of the markets in which we presently are present.
Thank you for this explanation. Although the question was quite general, I think you handled it very well. Then Adam is asking about aspects of operation and maintenance of a wind farm. So the question is, have you looked into autonomous unmanned aerial vehicles inspection of wind turbines and offshore substations to support O&M?
We already use drones and autonomous vehicles, both airborne and subsea. It's one of the benefits of working with the UK oil and gas sector. From a subsea point of view, they're very, very experienced in ROVs. So part of the installation process, but also, as Adam raised, the maintenance process, we can undertake inspections, but we can do more than that. We actually do some of the installation using ROVs and robotics. We are already looking at inspections of blades and towers and so on using drones. That is fairly not commonplace, but is fairly normal in the UK. We are presently also looking at options on things like delivery of components. We operate quite a long distance offshore. We have an SOV, an offshore service vessel that sits in the field on Moray East permanently. And this vessel will be supplemented by the delivery of small spares using drones and or sending drones to and from individual turbines. So yes, we are very, very interested in using ROV and drones for to reduce the requirement for individual staff to be available at turbines.
Thank you. Then the question about collaboration with academia. Does the industry has tie-ups with academics for research and development?
I think the answer is yes to that. I mean, we have strong, from our experience here in Scotland, we have strong relationships with the University of Aberdeen, Strathclyde University, whereby we work with them to understand opportunities, both from a sense of, do we want to sponsor PhD students or scholarships, but also are there early incubator companies spinning out of the universities that are looking to develop new ideas and new projects. So we're active in that arena. We're going to become more active for Caledonia because a large part of our proposal is to invest into R&D as part of project delivery. And when I talk about that, I talk about innovation and R&D in the development phase, the construction phase, and the O&M phase. So we're welcoming opportunities from universities or academics or PhD students within those institutes to come to us and talk to us about opportunities they see in the industry.
Yes,
we extensively use the research capabilities in things like ornithology and mammals and So we've gained a lot of experience in things like the installation process, the production of noise, the impact of noise on mammals, the impact of noise on fish, EMF, and so on and so on. So there are lots and lots of interactions between the development community and academia.
Yes, and actually the final question is about noise and environmental impact of a wind farm. Have you used sound mitigation technology for piling?
To date, we haven't as a company. We've done another thing that the industry does in the UK is we actively cooperate with one another in research projects. So we have, as a company, Ocean Winds has been actively involved in research projects with the Carbon Trust, with the ORE Catapult, which is the major research funding and coordination body in the UK for offshore wind. And so we've looked at things like bubble curtains, but we've also looked at damping systems used during the piling process. And we continue to do so. We haven't needed it so far, all right, as a developer. We have operated in sensitive areas. The Moray projects are in an area that is recognised as a very sensitive area for bottlenose dolphins. But again, in collaboration with the University of Aberdeen, we've managed to get techniques that don't use noise abatement, but actually monitor the activities of the mammals in the area. So we deploy sensitive listening equipment during the process, and we make sure that the mammals are not near us whilst we're actually piling. So we've done that sort of thing, but we haven't needed to actually deploy noise mitigation at the moment.
Oh, and part of that's during construction right now, because Moray East is in its operational phase. We're working again with the university on monitoring of marine mammals, particularly putting technology. And there's a project called Project Prepared, if anyone's interested, which we're participating in, which is around noise in the Moray Firth.
Thank you again. There are more questions coming to the chat box, but I'm conscious about time. I don't want to keep you and our audience for too long. So let's skip the other questions, and we will address them in a direct contact with you. Is that okay?
It's absolutely fine. Yeah, we would welcome this. All right, either through our colleagues in Poland or through myself and the team in Edinburgh. We're very, very keen to interact with all areas of the community, including those that are interested to work with us. As a company, we're always looking for the best staff, the best skills, the best people, and that's really what we're looking to do. And to learn the lessons from other geographies is just one of these aspects. But thank you very much for inviting us today.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you again for this interesting session. I would like to let you know that in a week's time, our French DIT colleagues, also in collaboration with DIT, are organizing a webinar on environmental impact of a wind farm. Registration is open and is available on our webpage. And for today, thank you again for joining us. Thank you, Dan and Mark, for your time, and wish you the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.